Welcome to another segment of our program on Native American activism in the 1970s. Today, we will be focusing our studies on the Wounded Knee occupation of 1973. Let's jump right in.
Wounded Knee is on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation located in the western part of South Dakota. Its name originates from the Wounded Knee Creek, which runs through the reservation. At Wounded Knee in 1980, the government banned the expanding religion of ghost dance, accompanied by the eradicating measures. Soldiers and arrested groups of the Lakota natives heading towards the reservation. The following day, when the military attempted to seize any weapons on the arrested Lakota members, a gun was accidentally fired at no fault of the tribe member, and shooting ensued. As a result, between 150 and 300 Lakota natives were killed in the massacre by the U.S. Army troops, which would be known as the Wounded Knee Massacre.
AIM, who orchestrated the Wounded Knee occupation in 1973, was founded during the summer of 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by Russell Means, Dennis Banks, and other Native leaders. Commonly centered in urban areas, the group of activists addressed the systemic issues of discrimination, sovereignty, and leadership against Native Americans. The treaties that were broken by the United States government over the years did not go unnoticed. AIM was determined to hold the United States accountable for their actions. For example, the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868 has stated that there would be no war against the nations that signed this peaceful agreement, and a section of land shall be granted and set apart for the occupation of the Indians named in this treaty. In 1877, Congress, however, changed the 1868 agreement and revoked the Black Hills after the discovery of gold in 1874. This was viewed as a violation of absolute and undisturbed use and occupation stated in the treaty, and the issue was brought to the court, U.S. versus Sioux Nation. This is just one example of the U.S. government's failure to uphold and protect the rights of Native Americans.
AIM was the driving force behind the Indigenous Civil Rights Movement. The kickstart to the American Indian movement started after the passing of the government's House Resolution 108 of 1953, requiring Native Americans to follow the same laws as regular citizens. This included once protected lands now being open to the public that were once reserved for Native Americans. AIM grew greatly during the 1970s following the success of the Civil Rights Movement. Inspired by the growing popularity of the Black Power movement, Native Americans began to use more militant tactics when confronting injustices. The movement was deemed the Red Power movement, headed by a young leader with a somewhat violent reputation. Before the occupation of Wounded Knee, other staged protest occupations have been orchestrated by AIM. This included the occupation of Alcatraz, which lasted 19 months from 1969 to 1971. Here, the reasons and grievances which inspired the occupation are listed, many of which correlate to AIM's reasons for the occupation of Wounded Knee 2 years later. By early 1973, AIM prepared themselves for the climactic occupation of Wounded Knee.
March 11, 1824, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was established. The BIA seeks to promote economic opportunity, enhance the quality of life, and follow through with their duty to protect and improve the trust assets of American Indians and tribes. However, it became part of the assaults against the Native American people. From banning their ceremonial dances such as the ghost dance to forcing Native American children into boarding schools, the BIA was hostile towards natives. They forbade children from using their native language in the classrooms which distanced them from their roots. Although there were many accumulated injustices performed by the U.S. government that led to the Wounded Knee occupation, a final straw occurred due to the failed attempt of the Lakota tribe members to impeach Dick Wilson, a chairman who was believed to corrupt and disrespect the culture. That is what the residents of the Pine Reservation turned to AIM for assistance. At this point in time, Native Americans had been pushed so far into the corner that the only solution in sight was to fight their way out of that confinement. Russell Mean portrays this when explaining in an interview.
We were about to be obliterated culturally. Our spiritual way of life, our entire way of life was about to be stamped out.
Pictured here is a photograph of Russell Means taken while he was fleeing from federal officials who had a warrant out for his arrest because of his involvement at the Wounded Knee occupation. In February 1973, the longest civil disorder in the history of the Marshal Service began. Seized February 27th, the town of Wounded Knee was occupied by members of the American Indian Movement, who staged a 71-day occupation of the area. Federal marshals surrounding the settlement exchanged gunfire with AIM members. Russell Means, a central figure in the American Indian Movement, started to negotiate for the release of the hostages, requiring that an investigation would be pursued into the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Additionally, they wanted a hearing to be held on the Indian treaties broken by the government. During the occupation, 2 Sioux men were shot and killed by government officials. Pictured here is an unnamed man holding up a rifle in Wounded Knee, South Dakota, right at the beginning of the Wounded Knee occupation of 1973. Following the AIM surrender on May 8th, U.S. Marshals gained back control of the town. AIM surrendered under the expectation that the FBI would investigate the complaints and investigate the Indian Bureau of Affairs. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, violence ensued throughout the 70s and confrontations continued as justice had still not been made. The U.S. government had been conscious of the power of media coverage, which was being taped and distributed across the nation about the conflict. Despite efforts to calm the news down, the story continued to spread thanks to the media's relentless coverage throughout America and also internationally. Although the story got a lot of attention for being advertised as some great Indian adventure, no real action occurred once the conflict had dissolved and the media turned to the next big story. Nixon, who was president at the time, had a strict response, refusing to meet and discuss treaties with AIM. Instead, the AIM members and leaders were put on trial for their actions. In an interview with William and Mary Staff, Henry Sigmund, a former AIM member, explains the stagnant conditions on reservations across America throughout the 70s all the way to the present.
You know, a lot of these guys, they weren't living. They were off the res. A lot of people don't realize is that, back in the 60s and 70s, it hasn't really changed a whole lot. Just some, reservations are. You can see third world poverty in our own country. People don't look at that. Within inside of our own country, as third world poverty on reservations. You go in any community that I've been in the United States, there's third world poverty. There's people that are poor, living in dirt houses, whatever.
Although immediate justice was not secured, the occupation did in part contribute to the larger success of American Indians in the future, such as the passing of the Indian Freedom of Religion Act of 1978, which guaranteed the right to practice traditional religious ceremonies at sacred sites. The Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978, which protects Native children by establishing regulations to keep the children under jurisdiction of the tribal government when removed from their parents' guardianship, and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990 created a system to return Native artifacts, remains, funerary objects, and more to their respected tribes.
The buildup of injustices perpetuated by the U.S. government towards Native Americans inspired a crucial demonstrations at Wounded Knee to save Native American culture. The revoking of the Treaty of Fort Laramie of 1868, the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890, House Resolution 108 in 1953, the corrupt behavior of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the failure to impeach Chairman Dick Wilson all had their part in leading the way to what would be the Wounded Knee occupation. The success in the short term was minimal as the government refused to comply with the requests of AIM and media attention moved to the next story. However, the demonstrations at the Wounded Knee was a part of a larger picture towards ensuring the rights of Native Americans. Some important legislations in the years following Wounded Knee include the Indian Freedom of Religion Act, the Indian Child Welfare Act, and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which contribute to the expansion of rights. The lead-up and aftermath of the Wounded Knee occupation of 1973 is critical in understanding a bigger picture in the constant battle for Native American rights.